The gunshot echoed across the valley as Quincy Parrish's bullet found its mark, dropping the mule deer where it stood. The year was 1885, and winter was approaching fast in Wyoming Territory. His son, 6-year-old Thomas, watched from atop his pony with wide eyes that reminded Quincy so much of his late wife that sometimes it hurt to look at the boy. "That's how it's done, son," Quincy said, dismounting to inspect his kill. "Clean shot. No suffering." Thomas nodded solemnly, his small hands gripping the saddle horn. "Pa, when we getting back to the ranch? It's getting mighty cold." Quincy looked up at the darkening sky. "Soon enough. Help me tie this to your horse, and we'll head home." As they worked, Thomas grew quiet, a thoughtful expression crossing his young face. Quincy had learned to recognize that look it usually preceded questions about patience. His mother, who had passed 3 years prior during a harsh winter fever that had swept through their settlement. "Pa," Thomas began hesitantly, "where's Ma?" The question still hit Quincy like a punch to the gut, even after all this time. He secured the last rope around the deer and turned to his son. "She's in heaven, Thomas. You know that. But when's she coming back?" The boy's voice was small against the vast landscape. Quincy sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through his dark hair. "She can't come back, son, but you've still got hands to hold." He reached up and grasped his son's small, cold hand in his own. "You've got mine." The boy nodded, though Quincy could see he didn't fully understand. How could he? Quincy himself still struggled to understand why God had taken patience from them so soon. They rode back to their ranch as the first snowflakes began to fall, the landscape transforming around them into a quiet, white world. Quincy's thoughts drifted, as they often did, to how he would raise this boy alone, a man without much tenderness left in him after the war and after losing his wife. But he had to try, for Thomas's sake. Little did he know that their lives were about to change dramatically as winter settled over the Wyoming plains. The homestead was a modest affair, a sturdy log cabin with a small barn and corral. Smoke curled from the chimney where Mrs. Holloway, their elderly neighbor who helped with Thomas, had kept the fire going. As they approached, Quincy noticed an unfamiliar horse tied outside. "Looks like we've got company," he told Thomas, immediately alert. Visitors were rare this time of year, especially with snow beginning to fall. Inside, they found Mrs. Holloway serving coffee to a woman Quincy had never seen before. She stood when they entered, and Quincy was struck by her appearance, not conventionally beautiful perhaps, but striking, with auburn hair tucked beneath a practical hat and eyes the color of summer sage. "Mr. Parrish," Mrs. Holloway said, "this is Miss Penelope Warren. She's the new schoolteacher for the county." Quincy removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his appearance after a day of hunting. "Madam," he nodded. "Didn't expect the county to send a teacher until spring. I insisted on arriving before winter set in completely," she replied, her voice clear and confident. Children's education shouldn't wait for favorable weather. Thomas peeked out from behind his father, and Penelope's expression softened immediately. "And who might this young man be?" "This here's Thomas," Quincy said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "My boy." "Hello, Thomas." Penelope smiled, crouching down to his level. "I'll be your teacher starting next week. Would you like that?" The boy shrugged, still shy, but Quincy could see a spark of interest in his eyes. "Miss Warren will be staying at the miller's place," Mrs. Holloway explained, "but their wagon broke an axle about 5 miles back. She walked the rest of the way here, hoping to find assistance." Quincy frowned. "You walked 5 miles in this weather?" "I'm more capable than I might appear, Mr. Parrish," Penelope replied with a hint of defiance that caught him off guard. Despite himself, Quincy felt a flicker of admiration. "Well, it's getting dark, and the snow's picking up. You'd best stay here tonight. I can take you to the miller's tomorrow and help with their wagon." "I wouldn't want to impose," she began, but Mrs. Holloway interrupted. "Nonsense. The spare room is already made up. I insist." And so their paths crossed, on a snowy evening in Wyoming Territory, neither of them knowing how their lives would become intertwined in the months to come. Penelope Warren had come west with dreams much bigger than teaching in a one-room schoolhouse. Born and raised in Boston, she had always felt constrained by society's expectations for women. When the opportunity arose to become a teacher in Wyoming Territory, where women had already gained the right to vote, and seemed to have more freedom, she seized it without hesitation, despite her family's protests. That night, after a simple but hearty dinner of venison stew, Penelope sat by the fire with Thomas, looking through one of the books she had brought for the school. "Can you read, Thomas?" she asked gently. The boy nodded. "Some. Ma taught me my letters before she." He trailed off, looking toward his father who was cleaning his rifle at the table. "Your mother taught you?" Penelope asked, careful to keep her tone light. "She was good with books," Quincy said without looking up. "Always reading to him." Penelope sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. "Well, she gave you a wonderful gift, Thomas. Would you like to read a bit of this to me?" As Thomas slowly read from the book, stumbling over the longer words but persevering, Penelope noticed Quincy watching them, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met briefly across the room, she felt a curious warmth spread through her chest, which she quickly attributed to the fire. The next morning dawned clear and cold. After breakfast, Quincy hitched up his wagon to take Penelope to the miller's place. Mrs. Holloway had already left for her own home, and Thomas was coming along for the ride. "Will you be starting school right away, Miss Warren?" Thomas asked as they traveled, the wagon wheels crunching through the fresh snow. "As soon as I can get settled," she replied. "Perhaps next Monday. I'm very excited to meet all the children." "There ain't many," Quincy said. "Maybe 15 in the whole county of school age. Some live too far to attend regular." "Every child deserves an education," Penelope said firmly. "Even in remote places like this." Quincy glanced at her. "Remote places like this are what built America, Miss Warren." She met his gaze steadily. "I didn't mean any disrespect, Mr. Parrish. I admire the fortitude it takes to carve a life out here." The tension between them eased slightly, and Quincy nodded. "It's not an easy life, but it's a good one." As they continued their journey, Penelope learned more about the area and its inhabitants. The Millers were one of the oldest families in the region. The county had grown slowly over the past decade, with ranchers, a few farmers, and a small town 20 miles east where supplies could be purchased. "What happened to the schoolteacher before me?" she asked. "There wasn't one," Quincy replied. "County's been trying to hire someone for 2 years now. So the children haven't had proper schooling all this time. Some parents teach what they can. Others send their children east to relatives for schooling if they can afford it." This explained Thomas's limited reading ability despite his mother's early teachings. Penelope felt a renewed determination to serve these frontier children well. They reached the Miller's homestead by mid-morning. Jacob Miller and his sons were already working on the broken wagon, but welcomed Quincy's help. While the men worked, Penelope was introduced to Mrs. Miller and her 3 daughters. "We're so pleased to have you, Miss Warren," Mrs. Miller said as she showed Penelope to the small but comfortable room that would be hers. "It's been too long since these children had proper schooling." "I'm eager to begin," Penelope replied, setting down her small trunk of personal belongings. "I hope to visit all the families this week to introduce myself before classes start." "That would be wonderful. Though some, like the Parrishes, live quite isolated." "Yes, I gathered that. Mr. Parrish seems." She searched for the right word, resolute. Mrs. Miller smiled knowingly. "Quincy's had a hard time since losing patience. Keeps to himself mostly, except for church and necessary business. That boy of his needs more than what Quincy alone can provide." Penelope thought of Thomas's eager face as they read together. "He seems like a bright child." "Oh, he is." Patience was determined he'd be educated, despite their circumstances. Her passing hit them both terribly hard. Before Penelope could inquire further about Patience Parrish, they were interrupted by the youngest Miller daughter with news that the wagon was fixed and lunch was ready. During the meal, Penelope observed Quincy with his son. Despite his gruff exterior, there was gentleness in how he made sure Thomas had enough to eat, the way he listened when the boy spoke. This man might be rough-hewn by frontier life, but he clearly loved his son deeply. When it was time for the Parrishes to depart, Penelope walked them to their wagon. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Parrish," she said. "I hope to see Thomas in school on Monday." Quincy nodded. "He'll be there." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything before then, the Millers know how to reach me." "I appreciate that." She turned to Thomas. "And I look forward to reading more books with you, Thomas." The boy smiled shyly. "Me too, Miss Warren." As they drove away, Penelope found herself watching until they disappeared over the hill. There was something about Quincy Parrish that intrigued her, a depth of character beneath the stoic exterior that made her curious to know more. The week passed quickly as Penelope visited the families whose children would be attending her school. The schoolhouse itself was a simple building in need of repairs, but the county had provided basic supplies, and Penelope supplemented with books and materials she had brought from Boston. By Sunday, she had met most of her future pupils and their families, except for 2 homesteads that were too distant to reach before school began. The community gathered at the small church in the valley, and Penelope was formally introduced to everyone by Reverend Fletcher. She noticed Quincy and Thomas sitting near the back, both dressed in their Sunday best. Thomas waved enthusiastically when he saw her, and even Quincy nodded in acknowledgement. After the service, as people mingled outside despite the cold, Penelope made her way to them. "Good morning, Thomas. Mr. Parrish," she greeted them. "I'm looking forward to tomorrow." "Miss Warren," Quincy replied, his hat in his hands. Thomas has been counting the days. "Really?" She smiled at the boy. "I got my slate all ready," Thomas said proudly. "And Pa's gonna bring me on horseback every day." "That's quite a commitment," Penelope said to Quincy, knowing the distance from their ranch to the schoolhouse was considerable. "Education's important," he said simply. His mother would have wanted it. Before Penelope could respond, they were interrupted by Jacob Miller with questions about the upcoming cattle drive in spring. As the men talked, Mrs. Miller drew Penelope aside. "I see you've made quite an impression on young Thomas already," she observed. "He's a sweet child, very eager to learn. And on his father, too, I'd wager," Mrs. Miller added with a knowing glance. Penelope felt her cheeks warm despite the cold. "I hardly know Mr. Parrish." "Well, that's the most I've seen him talk to anyone outside of business in 3 years. Quincy Parrish keeps his own counsel, but he's a good man. One of the best, despite his rough edges." The next day, school began with 12 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old. Thomas arrived punctually, delivered by his father, who tipped his hat to Penelope before riding off to his ranch work. Throughout the day, Penelope assessed her pupils' knowledge and abilities, finding that most needed significant help to reach the appropriate level for their ages. Thomas, despite his limited formal education, showed a natural aptitude for reading and mathematics that impressed her. During their midday break, while the children ate their packed lunches outside in the winter sunshine, Thomas approached her desk. "Miss Warren," he asked hesitantly, "do you know any stories about heaven?" The question caught her off guard. "Heaven? Well, yes, I suppose I do. From the Bible mainly. Pa says Ma is in heaven." His eyes, serious beyond his years, searched her face. "But I don't remember her much anymore. Just little bits." Penelope's heart ached for this child who was trying to understand loss at such a young age. "Heaven is a beautiful place, Thomas. The Bible tells us there's no pain or sadness there. Do you think she can see me? From heaven, I believe those who love us are always watching over us, even when they can't be with us anymore." Thomas considered this. "Pa says I've still got hands to hold, even without Ma. But sometimes he looks sad when I ask about her." "Your father loves you very much," Penelope said gently. "And it's probably hard for him to talk about your mother because he misses her too." The boy nodded solemnly. "Maybe you could help him not be sad sometimes." Before Penelope could respond to this surprising suggestion, the other children began returning from their lunch, and the moment passed. But Thomas's words stayed with her throughout the afternoon lessons and on her walk back to the Millers that evening. The first weeks of school established a routine. Quincy would bring Thomas each morning, exchange a few words with Penelope, and return in the afternoon to take his son home. Gradually, their conversations lengthened. Discussions about Thomas's progress gave way to talks about books, the community, and life in the territory. One afternoon in late January, Quincy arrived earlier than usual to collect Thomas. The other children had already left, and Penelope was helping Thomas with his reading. "You're making wonderful progress," she was saying as Quincy entered the schoolhouse. "Your mother would be very proud." Thomas beamed at the praise, then spotted his father. "Pa, Miss Warren says I'm the best reader in my group." "Is that so?" Quincy's normally stern face softened with pride. "Well done, son." As Thomas gathered his things, Quincy approached Penelope's desk. "Thank you for taking such care with him," he said quietly. "He talks about school non-stop these days. He's a joy to teach," she replied honestly. He has a natural curiosity that makes my job easy. Quincy hesitated, then said, I was wondering if you might join us for dinner this Sunday after church. Nothing fancy, just to thank you for what you've done for Thomas. The invitation surprised her. That's very kind of you, Mr. Parrish. I'd be delighted. Good. He nodded, seeming almost relieved. We'll see you Sunday then. That Sunday, after church services, Penelope rode with the Parrishes back to their ranch. The day had turned pleasant for February, with sunshine melting patches of snow and revealing hints of the approaching spring. Their homestead looked different in daylight than it had that first snowy evening, more welcoming somehow. Quincy had clearly made efforts to prepare for her visit. The cabin was tidy, the fire well stocked, and the table set with their best dishes. Thomas, show Miss Warren around while I get dinner ready, Quincy instructed. The boy eagerly took her hand. Come see my room first. Pa built me a special shelf for my books. As Thomas led her through the small cabin, Penelope noticed touches of a woman's influence that had remained: handmade curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on Thomas's bed, a small collection of books that seemed too delicate for a rancher's hands. Those were Ma's, Thomas said, following her gaze to the bookshelf in his room. Pa says I can have them when I'm bigger. Penelope ran her finger along the spines: poetry by Tennyson, Wordsworth, and Keats, novels by Austen and the Brontes. Your mother had excellent taste in literature. She used to read to me every night, Thomas said matter-of-factly. Pa tries, but he says he's not good with the fancy words. Perhaps we could read something together after dinner, Penelope suggested. Thomas's face lit up. Could we? Pa wouldn't mind. He likes listening too, even if he pretends to be doing other things. The boy's insight into his father made Penelope smile. Then we shall definitely read something. Dinner was simple but delicious: roast venison, potatoes, and fresh bread that Quincy admitted he'd traded with a neighbor for. As they ate, conversation flowed more easily than Penelope had expected. Quincy asked about her background, and she told them about growing up in Boston. What made you come all the way out here? He asked. Most Eastern folks think Wyoming's still wild Indian country. I wanted something different, she answered honestly. In Boston, a woman's path is very prescribed: marriage, children, social obligations. Teaching is acceptable, but even then, you're expected to eventually set it aside for family duties. She paused. Out here, it feels like there's more possibility to define your own life. Quincy studied her for a moment. It's a harder life, though, perhaps, but there's an honesty to it that appeals to me. After dinner, true to her promise, Penelope read from one of Patience's books of poetry. Thomas leaned against her on the sofa, while Quincy sat in his chair by the fire, ostensibly cleaning his boots, but listening intently. When it grew dark, Quincy insisted on driving Penelope back to the miller's himself, leaving Thomas in the care of Mrs. Holloway, who had come to help for the evening. The night was clear, with stars scattered like diamonds across the Wyoming sky. They rode mostly in companionable silence until they were about halfway to the miller's homestead. I should thank you again, Quincy said suddenly. Not just for teaching Thomas his letters, but for bringing something back to him that I couldn't provide. What do you mean? Penelope asked softly. That way you have with books, with stories. It reminds him of his mother. Quincy kept his eyes on the road ahead. Patience was like that, always had her nose in a book, always dreaming. I used to tease her about it, but truth is, I admired how she could see beauty in words where I just saw paper. You loved her very much, Penelope observed, feeling a surprising twinge in her heart. She was everything to me, he said simply. When she died, I thought. Well, it doesn't matter what I thought. I had Thomas to consider. You've done a remarkable job raising him alone. Quincy glanced at her. Not alone. This community helps. Mrs. Holloway, the Millers, Reverend Fletcher. And now you. The way he included her touched Penelope deeply. I'm honored to be part of Thomas's life. As winter gradually gave way to spring, Penelope became a regular visitor at the Parrish ranch. Sometimes she would ride out with Quincy and Thomas after church on Sundays. Other times, Quincy would invite her for dinner on a weeknight, always with the pretext of discussing Thomas's education, though their conversations increasingly strayed to other topics. She learned that Quincy had fought for the Union in the war, returning home to Pennsylvania only to find his family farm failing. He had headed west, working as a ranch hand until he saved enough to claim his own land. He had met Patience in town. She was a merchant's daughter visiting from Illinois, and courted her for 6 months before convincing her to marry him and build a life in Wyoming. In turn, Penelope shared more of her own story, her love of literature fostered by an understanding father, her brief engagement to a Boston lawyer that she had broken when she realized she would suffocate in the life he envisioned for her decision to teach, and the opportunity that had brought her west. As April brought new green to the landscape, Quincy invited Penelope to join them for a Saturday picnic by the creek that ran through his property. The day was perfect, warm sunshine, wildflowers beginning to dip the meadows, and the creek running full with snowmelt from the mountains. Thomas ran ahead, eager to show Penelope his favorite spots, while Quincy carried the picnic basket Mrs. Holloway had helped prepare. "This is where Pa taught me to fish," Thomas called, pointing to a bend in the creek. "And over there's where we saw a bear last summer." From a very safe distance, Quincy added with a smile that transformed his normally serious face. They spread their blanket in a sunny spot near the water. After they ate, Thomas begged to be allowed to explore the creek bank, and Quincy agreed as long as he stayed within sight. Alone together, a comfortable silence settled between them as they watched Thomas collecting stones and interesting sticks. "He's thriving at school," Penelope said eventually. "He has a quick mind." "Gets that from his mother," Quincy replied. "She was smart as a whip." "You must miss her terribly." Quincy was quiet for so long that Penelope wondered if she had overstepped. Finally, he said, "Every day. But lately, it's different." "Different how?" He turned to look at her, his eyes searching hers. "When Patience first died, I couldn't imagine ever feeling anything but grief. The world went gray. I functioned for Thomas's sake, but that was all. Then slowly, color started coming back, mostly through him. And now, Penelope prompted when he trailed off. "Now I find myself looking forward to things again. Sunday dinners. Your visits." His voice dropped lower. "Conversations with you." Penelope's heart quickened. "I look forward to those things too." "I never expected to feel this way again," Quincy admitted. "And part of me feels guilty for it." "Why guilty?" "Because I promised Patience I'd love her forever." Penelope reached out and placed her hand over his. "Loving someone new doesn't mean you loved her any less. It means your heart has healed enough to love again." Quincy looked down at their joined hands, then slowly turned his palm up to clasp hers properly. "You're unlike any woman I've ever known, Penelope Warren." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her. Before either could say more, Thomas came running back, excited about a frog he had spotted. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing for months. That evening, as Quincy drove Penelope back to the miller's homestead, Thomas fell asleep in the wagon, worn out from his adventures. In the quiet darkness, with only the sound of horses and wheels on the dirt road, Quincy spoke again of Patience. "She got sick so quickly," he said softly. "One day she was fine, the next she was burning with fever. The doctor came from town, but by then pneumonia had set in. She knew she was dying." His voice caught. "The last thing she said to me was to take care of Thomas, to make sure he grew up knowing he was loved." Penelope listened, her heart aching for his loss. "I've tried my best," Quincy continued, "but there are things a boy needs that a father can't provide alone. The gentleness, the patience, the way a mother sees the world. You've done more than try, Quincy. Thomas is a wonderful boy, kind, curious, thoughtful. That speaks to how you've raised him." They reached the miller's farm, and Quincy pulled the wagon to a stop. He turned to look at her in the moonlight. "What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that Thomas needs someone like you in his life. And if I'm honest, so do I." Penelope's breath caught in her throat. "Quincy, I'm not asking anything of you right now," he said quickly. "Just think about what it might mean for all of us if you were to stay beyond this school year." The school term was set to end in June, and Penelope had not yet decided whether to renew her contract with the county. Her family in Boston expected her to return, considering her Western adventure a temporary phase. "I'll think about it," she promised. As spring bloomed into summer, Penelope found herself increasingly torn. Her feelings for both Quincy and Thomas had grown deeper than she had ever anticipated. The isolated life that had once seemed so foreign to her now felt like home. Yet her family's letters urged her return, and the Boston school where she had previously taught had offered her position back. Meanwhile, her relationship with Quincy continued to develop, though both were careful not to rush. They shared longer conversations, occasional touches, and once, when he helped her down from her horse after a ride, his hands had lingered at her waist while their eyes held a silent conversation of their own. Thomas, observant as always, had begun asking pointed questions. "Do you like my pa, Miss Warren?" he asked one day after school. "Of course I do, Thomas. Your father is a good man." "No, I mean, do you like him?" the boy persisted. "The way Ma liked him." Penelope felt her cheeks flush. "That's a very personal question." "I think you do," Thomas said confidently. "And I think he likes you too. He smiles more when you're around." "Does that bother you?" she asked carefully. Thomas considered this seriously. "No, I miss Ma, but I don't remember her as much anymore. Just little things, like her laugh and the way she smelled like flowers." He looked up at Penelope. "I think she'd want Pa to be happy. And me too." The wisdom in this child never ceased to amaze her. "Thomas, no one could ever replace your mother in your heart or your father's." "I know that," he said with the certainty of childhood. "But Pa says hearts can grow bigger." "They don't have to replace, they just make more room." Quincy's words, filtered through his son's understanding, touched Penelope deeply. That evening, as she walked back to the Millers, she made her decision. She would stay at least another year and see where this newfound chance at happiness might lead. The school term ended with a community celebration where the children demonstrated what they had learned. Parents beamed with pride as their offspring recited poetry, solved mathematical problems, and displayed their penmanship. Thomas, standing tall before the assembled families, read an entire passage from Robinson Crusoe without hesitation, earning appreciative murmurs from the audience and a rare public smile from his father. Afterward, as families mingled and enjoyed the potluck supper, Penelope announced that she would be returning in the fall to continue teaching. The news was met with approval and relief from the parents who had seen their children thrive under her instruction. Quincy found her later, as she was gathering her teaching materials. "You're staying," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I am." She met his gaze steadily. "Because of the children?" "Partly," she admitted. "They deserve consistency in their education." "And the other part?" His voice had dropped lower, though no one was near enough to overhear. Penelope took a deep breath. "Because I found something here I never expected. A community. A purpose." She paused. "People I care about deeply." Quincy stepped closer. "I care about you too, Penelope. More than I thought possible after patience." "I know it's complicated," she said softly. "I know Thomas comes first for you, as he should." "It's not as complicated as you might think." Quincy glanced across the room to where Thomas was playing with the other children. "He adores you. He asked me last week if you could come live with us instead of the Millers." Penelope's eyes widened. He did. I told him that's something a man has to ask a woman properly, and only when they both feel ready." Her heart skipped a beat. "And do you feel ready?" "I think I'm getting there," Quincy said honestly. "I can't promise I won't still have days when I miss Patience. But I know she would want Thomas and me to be happy." Penelope nodded, understanding. "We have time. I'm not going anywhere." The summer months brought a new rhythm to their relationship. With school out, Penelope had more freedom to visit the Parrish ranch. She began teaching Thomas piano on the small instrument at the church, with Reverend Fletcher's blessing. Quincy would often join them, claiming he was just there to listen, but Penelope caught him watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. One evening in late July, they sat on the porch of Quincy's cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Thomas had gone to bed, exhausted from a day of helping his father with ranch chores. "I never thought I'd love this land the way I do now," Penelope said, taking in the vast landscape before them. "When I first arrived, it seemed so empty, so harsh. And now?" Quincy asked, his chair pulled close to hers. "Now I see its beauty, the strength it takes to survive here, yes, but also the incredible rewards. The sky that goes on forever, the wildflowers that somehow push through the harshest soil, the community that relies on one another." Quincy reached over and took her hand. "I used to think I came west to find land, to build something that was mine alone. But that wasn't it at all." "What was it then?" I was searching for home. He turned to face her fully. Patience helped me begin to build it. After she died, I thought that dream had died too. But it didn't. It just waited. Waited for what? Penelope asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. For the missing piece. Quincy's thumb traced circles on her palm. For you. The simple declaration, spoken in his straightforward way, moved her more than any flowery profession could have. Quincy. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Penelope closed the distance between them, meeting his lips with hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His hand came up to cradle her face, gentle despite the calluses earned from years of ranch work. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Penelope Warren. I didn't expect to, but I do. I love you too, she whispered, the words she had held back for months finally finding voice. Both you and Thomas. They sat together as darkness fell, talking of the future, not making definite plans yet, but allowing themselves to imagine possibilities that had seemed unthinkable months before. The following Sunday after church, Quincy asked Penelope to join him for a ride, just the two of them. Thomas would stay with the Millers for the afternoon. Where are we going? She asked as they rode side by side across the rolling grassland. There's something I want to show you, was all he would say. They rode for almost an hour before cresting a hill that revealed a picturesque valley below. A clear stream wound through meadows dotted with late summer flowers, and a stand of cottonwood trees provided shade near the water. It's beautiful, Penelope breathed as they dismounted. This land adjoins my property to the north, Quincy explained as he helped her down from her horse. I bought it last month from Jacob Miller, who'd been holding it for his youngest son who decided to go east instead. You're expanding your ranch? Not exactly. He took her hand and led her toward the cottonwoods. I thought this might be a good place for a house. A bigger one, with proper rooms for everyone. Penelope's heart began to race as his meaning became clear. Quincy. They reached the trees, and he turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I know it's fast, maybe too fast. If you need more time, I understand. But I've learned that life can be shorter than we expect, and when you find happiness, you shouldn't wait to embrace it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. From it, he extracted a ring, a simple gold band with a small pearl. It's not fancy, he said apologetically. Had to order it from Denver. But I thought the pearls suited you, elegant but strong. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes. It's perfect. Quincy took a deep breath. Penelope Warren, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of being a mother to Thomas, and perhaps, he swallowed, perhaps more children, if we're blessed that way? Of building a life together here, where we've both found home. Yes, she whispered, then more firmly. Yes, Quincy Parrish. I would be honored to be your wife. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace that sealed their commitment to one another. As they stood together beneath the cottonwoods, Penelope felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wild, beautiful land had given her what Boston never could: the freedom to choose her own path, and a love that respected her strength rather than seeking to contain it. They married in October, when the aspens had turned gold and the first hint of winter crispness touched the air. The ceremony was held in the church, with Thomas proudly standing beside his father as best man. The entire community turned out to celebrate, with a feast afterward that featured contributions from every household. Penelope wore a dress of deep blue rather than traditional white, a choice that raised a few eyebrows but seemed perfectly fitting for a bride who had never followed conventional paths. Quincy, nearly unrecognizable in his best suit with his hair neatly trimmed, couldn't take his eyes off her throughout the ceremony. That night, after the celebrations had ended and Thomas was asleep in his room, Quincy and Penelope stood together in the cabin that would be their home until the new house was completed in spring. Are you happy, Mrs. Parrish? Quincy asked softly, his arms around her waist. Completely, she assured him, reaching up to touch his face. And you? More than I ever thought possible again. He kissed her gently, then more deeply, the promise of their wedding night hanging between them. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Penelope's head resting on his chest, Quincy spoke of patience once more. The night before she died, she made me promise something, he said, his voice a rumble beneath Penelope's ear. She said, "Promise me you won't let your heart turn to stone." Penelope raised herself on one elbow to look at him. "She knew you well." "She did. And for a while, I failed her. I did let grief harden me." His hand stroked Penelope's hair. "Until Thomas asked about his mother one day, and I told him she was in heaven." "And what did he say?" Penelope asked, though Thomas had told her parts of this story himself. He asked if that meant he'd never have a mother to hold his hand again. Quincy's voice caught slightly. "I told him, she's in heaven, but you've still got hands to hold." "I meant mine, of course. But now he has mine as well." Penelope finished, placing her hand over Quincy's heart. "Yes." He covered her hand with his own. "I think Patience would be pleased. She always wanted Thomas to be surrounded by love." "He is," Penelope assured him. "And so are you." Winter came early that year, with heavy snows that delayed construction on their new home. The small cabin felt cozy rather than cramped as they settled into life as a family. Penelope continued teaching, with Quincy still bringing Thomas to school each day, though now he often lingered for a goodbye kiss that made the children giggle and Thomas pretend embarrassment. In the evenings, they established new traditions, reading aloud together, music lessons at the piano Quincy surprised Penelope with for Christmas, and long conversations by the fire after Thomas was asleep. Quincy proved to be a better reader than he had claimed, especially when encouraged by his wife's patient instruction. By spring, it was clear their family would be growing. Penelope's pregnancy brought both joy and anxiety for Quincy, who couldn't help but remember Patience's difficult birth with Thomas and her later vulnerability to the fever that took her. But Penelope's robust health and the presence of a skilled midwife in the community gradually eased his fears. Their new house was completed in May, a spacious two-story home with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Penelope insisted on a large room for books and music, while Quincy focused on practical aspects like a root cellar for storing food through winter. Thomas helped plan his own room and a nursery for his coming sibling. On a warm evening in June, they sat together on their new porch, Thomas between them, as they watched fireflies begin to flicker in the gathering dusk. "Pa," Thomas said suddenly, "do you think Ma can see us from heaven?" The question no longer caused the sharp pain it once had. Quincy met Penelope's eyes over their son's head before answering. "I do, son. I think she watches over all of us, even the new baby." Thomas placed a gentle hand on Penelope's growing belly. "Especially the new baby," Penelope said, covering his small hand with hers. "Your mother will always be part of our family, Thomas. The love she gave you and your father didn't disappear. It's still here, helping our family grow stronger." Thomas considered this. "So I have 2 mothers? One in heaven and one here." "That's right," Quincy confirmed, his voice steady despite the emotion Penelope could see in his eyes. "You're a fortunate boy." "I know," Thomas said with the simple certainty of childhood. "I've got lots of hands to hold now." As if to demonstrate, he took one of Penelope's hands and one of his father's, connecting them across his lap. The 3 of them sat together as stars began to appear in the vast Wyoming sky, a family forged not by forgetting the past, but by honoring it while embracing the future. In September, Penelope gave birth to a daughter they named Faith Patience Parrish. Thomas took his role as big brother seriously, proudly helping in whatever small ways he could. Quincy, holding his daughter for the first time, looked at his wife with such overwhelming love that words seemed unnecessary. Their family continued to grow over the years, another son 2 years later, then twin girls who tested even Penelope's considerable patience but brought immeasurable joy. The ranch prospered, and Quincy eventually built a proper schoolhouse on their land when the county's population grew enough to need a second teacher. Penelope never regretted her decision to stay in Wyoming. The life she had found there challenging, unpredictable, but deeply fulfilling was richer than anything she could have imagined in Boston. She kept teaching, raising her children to love books and ideas while respecting the practical knowledge their father imparted. On Thomas's 18th birthday, as the family celebrated together, he announced his intention to attend college in Denver, the first in their community to seek higher education. Quincy, who had once thought such things unnecessary for a ranching life, beamed with pride at his son's ambition. "Your mother would be proud," he told Thomas that night. an arm around Penelope as they watched their oldest child accept congratulations from neighbors and friends. "Which one?" Thomas asked with a teasing smile. "Both," Quincy and Penelope answered in unison. Later, when the party had ended and the younger children were asleep, Penelope found Quincy standing on their porch, looking up at the stars. "A penny for your thoughts," she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Just thinking about how life turns," he replied, covering her hands with his own. "If someone had told me 15 years ago that I'd be standing here with you, with 5 children and a son heading to college, I'd have said they were touched in the head." Penelope rested her cheek against his back. "Are you happy with how it turned out?" Quincy turned in her arms to face her. Though lines had appeared at the corners of his eyes and silver threaded through his dark hair, he was still the same man who had captured her heart years before, strong, honest, dedicated to those he loved. "More than happy," he assured her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Grateful beyond words." "For what specifically?" she teased, knowing his discomfort with expressing emotions even after all these years. "For second chances," he said seriously. "For a boy who needed more than I alone could give him. For a woman brave enough to leave everything familiar and make a new life in this wild place." He kissed her gently. "For you, Penelope Parrish, who taught us both that while some hands may be taken from us too soon, there are always more hands to hold if we're brave enough to reach for them." Under the vast Wyoming sky, surrounded by the home and family they had built together, they held each other close, two people who had found each other across grief and distance, creating a love that honored the past while embracing all the promise of their future together.